Hi, I'm Professor Green, and we'll be talking today about Chapter 10, the foreign exchange market, a really exciting place for those of you who are interested in international business and how money gets traded. So let's go ahead and talk about the learning objectives here. First, we're going to describe the functions of the foreign exchange market. What does it do besides just going to Turkey and exchanging your dollars for the local currency? There's actually like a stock market that works just in foreign exchange. Understands what meant by spot exchange rate, so like the daily rate. Recognize that the forward exchange rate plays in ensuring against foreign exchange risk, right? So what if the dollar appreciates or depreciates? How can you protect yourself? Understand the different theories explaining how currency exchange rates are determined. We've talked a lot about the economic theories in this course already. Identify the merits of these different approaches towards exchange rate forecasting, right? Because if you're working with markets, you're always trying to forecast, right? If the markets will go up or down. And then the last learning objective, just like any of the other chapters, comparing, contrasting the difference among translation, transaction, and economic exposure, and explaining the implications for management practice. Great, so let's go ahead and get started, deep diving into Forex. The opening case here is about the two different Korean airlines, Korean Airlines and Asiana Airlines. And this was a really interesting story for me to really see how foreign exchange can affect a business. So there was hit by significant foreign exchange losses from the weaknesses of the Korean won against the US dollar in 2019. And again, the author pulls from a lot of, at the time, were current issues, and the Trump administration was in power. And he's saying that the Trump administration, with all of their mercantilism ideas and ideas that he wanted to put on some tariffs and things like that, that people started to then invest in the United States and in the US dollar, and that made the US dollar appreciate and foreign currencies depreciate. And so for companies like these two Korean airlines, they got into a little bit of trouble because they had two investments that had to do with the US dollar. So first they bought JetFlu, that's always priced in US dollars. And so now when the Korean won depreciates, now they're paying more for the jet fuel. The second thing was that they both took on dollar-denominated debt to finance their purchase of the jet craft. And when they did that, right, they didn't really necessarily predict that there'd be such such a change in an exchange rate. And we'll talk later in this chapter about how they could have bought insurance for that. But in this case, they didn't. And so now, again, when the American dollar appreciated so quickly, now they're paying a lot more for their debt, unfortunately. And as I said, it was driven by economic uncertainty, increased by this demand for dollars. Also, this global pandemic, when the book was written, was just at the beginning of the pandemic, and we didn't really know how it was going to affect that. I saw some notes later on from the author of the textbook who was saying that from 2018 to 2020, the Korean won depreciated against the dollar by 12.5%, which is a lot of money, right? And so now their total costs were going to increase by 12.5%. So let's go ahead and get into the details in this chapter as to, what they could have done differently, how they got into this mess, etc. First, what is the foreign exchange market, otherwise known, as I mentioned, Forex? It's the market for converting the currency of one country into that of another. I think many of you have traveled abroad, so you'll know that, right? You go to Mexico or you go to Europe, you have to get a euro or you have to get the Czech crown, etc. It can have a significant impact on the sales and profits of an enterprise because, as we speak about, these organizations are either importing or exporting or working with FDI, really truly investing in another country. The managers must understand how this Forex works and its possible impact. And just to clarify, right, the exchange rate is the rate at which one currency is converted into another. And a fun fact, again, that I thought was interesting, that without the Forex market, right, that international trade and investment would be impossible, right? Because we're going to spend the next couple of slides getting deep diving into the Forex market really, and at the end of the day thinking like, what do I need this for? Well, you do need it because if we didn't have it, then we would have to barter, which people do, which we'll talk about as well, but obviously less efficient. So we really depend on those Forex markets in many, many ways. Let's go ahead and jump into the next slide. So the function of the Forex market has two major functions. First, to enable conversions of the currency from one country into another, but it also provides some insurance against this foreign exchange risk, right? And that's why I was saying that Korean Airlines sounds like they didn't necessarily take on that opportunity for insurance. So the adverse consequences of unpredictable changes in the exchange rates, and so that organizations can, as we will talk about in just a minute, buy certain currency based on an established value for 60 or 90 days in advance. Let's go ahead and click onto the next slide. We're going to first talk about the currency conversion one, the simple one. This is to export receipts, to convert export receipts. So again, if you sell a product abroad and they give you euros, you go to the foreign exchange market and they will then give you dollars that you can use here in the United States. Also from income received from foreign investments, income received from licensing agreements. I sell my yoga DVDs in the UK and in Germany, and I have a distributor there that always then deposits money into my American bank account, either in the British currency or in the euro. So to pay a foreign company for products and services, right? To invest spare cash for short terms in money markets. So we're already alluding to some potential quick wins. And this is really what they're talking about here is currency speculation. So short-term movement of funds from one currency to another in hopes of profiting from shifts in exchange rates. And so a lot of people will become Forex day traders, and they'll sit there all day watching the markets and looking to see if a foreign exchange is different, is so that like, well, there are a couple of different ways to do it, but the carry trades, let's talk about carry trades first. We borrow one currency where the interest rates are low and invest in another currency where interest rates are high. But these things are very risky. And then the other way that people do it is that you maybe convert US dollars for the euro, but then you see the euro to yen have a gap, and then the yen back to the dollar. There could be some money made by doing those two different transactions. So an interesting place to be, but as the book says, very, very risky. So this is a picture of tourists exchanging currency in Istanbul, which I'm sure many of you have done. And this is exactly what the simple place is for this Forex market. The second function of the Forex market is insuring against foreign exchange risk. And this is where I think, nerds like me, when it comes to international business, really get excited because it gives businesses opportunities to protect themselves against changes in the market. So it can provide insurance against a foreign exchange risk. It's a firm, okay, it's called hedging, right? And so you've probably heard about hedging in your other courses, but right, it's paying money in advance to help protect yourself, right? Just like we buy life insurance or we buy health insurance, right? We pay money every month for our health insurance in the chance that we have an accident or we have to go to the doctor, et cetera. And then we'd have to pay more money, but because we hedged, we would pay less money. And the Forex market does this in three different ways. The first one is the spot exchange rate, then the forward exchange rate, and then these exciting places called currency swaps, which are really the most common. So let's go ahead first into spot exchange rates. So this is a real simple one. So that a spot exchange rate is what's happening here today, right now. It's the rate at which a foreign exchange dealer converts one currency into another on a particular day, determined by the interaction between supply and demand, and the changes happen continuously. So this is today's rate. So if I wanted to buy a product in Germany today, I would then, okay, I'd go online and I'd enter my credit card details, but then my credit card, the bank, is converting that amount for that product at today's rate. And this can be quoted, right, in two different ways. So when you go to a different country and you look at those foreign exchange boards, right, they're usually two values. And I'm sure, again, you're all familiar with this, but right, it can be quoted first in the amount of foreign currency that one US dollar will buy, or it'll be the value of the dollar for 1 unit of foreign currency. And I had to look at my definition because it's so like elementary to me. I don't think about it anymore. I just really needed to make sure I had the words for that. So again, right, so you'll see two different values. And typically, right, when I go abroad, I look for the first one. So the amount of US currency that $1 will buy is usually typically what we use when we travel abroad. And if people were coming here, they would, from Germany, et cetera, they'd be doing the reverse. So let's hop into foreign exchange rates, because this is a very, very popular tool. The exchange rate governing a forward exchange. Two parties agreed to exchange currency and execute the deal at some specific date in the future. They're usually quoted for 30, 90, or 100 days. And it can work against the company, right, if it devalues or if it changes value, et cetera. But these values, future values, forward exchange are really based on past history, what they expect the rate to be. And again, it's this insurance, knowing that I will pay for this product at this particular rate when I'm ready to pay for that product, right? So Apple, right, buys, has, laptops that they sell in Japan that we'll get to an example in a minute. And they're going to say, okay, I'm going to buy this, but I'm going to plan on buying the yen, or plan on selling the yen at 90 days when I have the laptops and when I get the money from the distributor, et cetera. And so you kind of ahead of the game, ahead of the time when the deal is going to close, I guess you can think of it that way, then you plan on what the exchange rate is going to be. The nice thing is to hear that a third of the rate of the deals that we see on the Forex market are spot exchange. So they're like me going out and buying a product in Germany on the internet right here, right now. I get the rate that exists right at this moment. 2/3, though, are foreign instruments. So the people then, plan on a exchange rate that's going to happen in the future. But they're not really actually using these forward exchange rates that we talked about here. They're typically doing what's called a foreign exchange swap. So let's get into the next slide, and then we'll talk about that. It's a little bit more of a sophisticated tool. This is where we simultaneously purchase and sale of a given amount of foreign exchange for two different value dates. Swaps are used when it's desirable to move out of one currency into another for a limited period of time without incurring foreign exchange rate risk. So again, the example that they give in the book, I thought was a really good one. That Apple, they produce laptops here in the United States, but the screens for your laptop that potentially can be made in Japan. So they're going to have to then pay the vendor for the screens in Japan. And so Apple's going to, American firm, they're going to have to trade US dollar into the Japanese currency. But then 90 days later, they expect to then sell those laptops that they made in the US with the Japanese screens. They're going to sell them to Japanese consumers, and they work through a distributor. And so that distributor then is going to give Apple all this Japanese currency, all this yen, and the United States, Apple doesn't need the yen, they need the US dollar. So they're going to convert all that yen back into US dollar. And so what Apple then decides to do is decide to buy yen at a certain time to pay this supplier, because they know the deal is going to go through. So they're going to buy at a certain rate. And then 90 days later, they're going to have to sell that yen back to themselves when they get the money from the distributor. So they enter in an agreement for two different rates. And so that's why it's called a swap, because they're swapping the US dollar into yen temporarily and then swapping it back. So it's interesting. If anybody's interested in going to foreign exchange, please let me know. I have a few contacts who do this all day, every day. And I'm excited to talk to you about part 2 of chapter 10 in the next video.